Good Friday. It's been described as a day of ignominy. Now, that's not a word that's used very frequently. Ignominy means shame, disgrace, dishonor, public contempt, to despise. It's used to describe not Jesus, of course, but the behavior of the people of Jerusalem. Jesus had been warned many more than one time not to go near Jerusalem. He had so many powerful enemies in that great city. But his destiny lay in going to Jerusalem, being arrested, condemned, tortured, crucified, and dying there. As Doug said last Sunday, Jesus' passion and death certainly was carefully planned and arranged by him, starting on Thursday night when he and the apostles celebrated Passover. When we think of the Last Supper, we always connected with Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting, you remember, and it is so beautiful, but the painting is incorrect. Jesus and the apostles wouldn't have been sitting at a table at all. They would have been sitting on the floor with a blanket or a large cloth in front of them, and they would eat the Passover meal from several large plates. After he blessed and broke the bread, Jesus said, "This is my body." And then he said, after taking up the cup, "This is my blood." Now, believe it or not, these were common Aramaic expressions among close friends, expressions of love and trust. They would say things like, "My life and my blood are for you," or "Take the very sight of my eyes, if you will." They were expressions of trust, friendship, closeness. These kind of statements would have been very, very familiar to the apostles. It wouldn't have been anything unusual at all. Then they would have started eating, using the bread to pinch and hold and eat the lamb that was always part of this feast. It was always served at that time. But believe it or not, there would have been only one spoon for the whole group, for a dozen men or more, to serve themselves. And there would have only been one cup for everyone to drink the wine. It simply would have been refilled and refilled. Spoons and cups were scarce, very scarce. So everyone shared everything. As they ate, Jesus told them that one of them was going to betray him. And they were shocked. "Is it I, Lord? Is it I?" Of course, he was so psychic, he was so intuitive, that he automatically knew the truth behind the pleasant facade that Judas showed. Of course, Judas left the dinner pretty quickly. Once the rest of the group had finished eating, they sang hymns together, and then they left for the Garden of Gethsemane, which was a well-used public park. Jesus went apart to pray, and he only took Peter, James, and John with him. He thought that they too would pray, but it had been a long day, and they had just eaten a very large meal, and they promptly fell asleep. He thought to himself, "Couldn't you pray with me just this little while?" So he moved on further away from them, and of course grew sadder and more fearful as the minutes went by. The next hours were going to herald terrible things for him. He prayed, "Oh, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt." He prayed and prayed and prayed. The religious hostility that existed between him and the hierarchy of the Jewish people would demand his death. And of course, naturally, he wanted to live. But God's will be done. And gradually peace must have filled his heart, knowing that even though it was a terrible thing that he would have to experience, good would come from it. A group led by Judas suddenly appeared, and Judas identified Jesus by kissing him. And then Jesus was arrested by a group of Roman soldiers. Jesus was taken before the Jewish council, first of all, and they had summoned a group of false witnesses to bring a number of charges against him. This was going to be done properly, of course. But their various testimonies were so contradictory that they were useless in the effort to convict him of falsely teaching that he was God's physical son instead of God's spiritual son. Many of Jesus' followers had called him by the lofty title of Son of David, and that infuriated the Pharisees. The Son of David, because David was of royal lineage. A Galilean could not possibly be a descendant of David. The Galileans were a mixed race background. They were descendants of Assyrians, actually, who were transferred there during the Babylonian captivity. The Babylonians were very clever, crafty people. When they conquered an area, they would take a group of people that they had control over and move the majority of them into the place they had just conquered, and then took those people back to Babylon. You see, if people were trying to adjust to living in a new place, trying to find food, adjusting to the area, they wouldn't have time to foment rebellion against the Babylonians. They were fully occupied trying to live where they had been moved. Of course, they later married Jewish people, and so they were, as the Pharisees felt, a mixed race. The Messiah had to be of royal lineage. Nothing less would do. And Jesus was not. He had blasphemed and called himself the Son of God, the spiritual Son of God. But they took it that he meant the physical Son of God. And so they felt perfectly justified in treating him horribly, in spitting in his face, hitting him over the head with blunt objects, and beating him over and over again. The Pharisees wanted him dead, and quickly, because they were in the midst of the feast of Passover. But they did not have the authority to kill him, to crucify him. He had to be found guilty of treason by the Roman authority, and the Roman authority was Pontius Pilate. He was taken to Pilate. Pilate spoke with Jesus, and he couldn't find any reason to condemn him to death. He couldn't see any treason that he had committed. So he sent him to Herod. Maybe Herod would know something about this. Herod was very much delighted to have him sent, because Herod had wanted to meet him. He'd heard about the master's healing work, And Jesus could have saved himself very, very easily by talking to each of these men. He refused to say one word to Herod. He would not speak to him, and Herod sent him back to Pilate. If Jesus had wanted to, he could have used his extraordinary intellect or performed a healing, and these men would have been immediately convinced that Jesus shouldn't die. But again, without Jesus saying anything, Herod again could not find him guilty of treason, but there was an unruly crowd outside the door, and it was close to rioting, and Pilate didn't want a riot. Pilate told the group that the custom was to release one prisoner on feast days, and certainly this was a feast day. Did the crowd want him to release Jesus or a well-known criminal known as Barabbas? Now, Jesus' entry into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday was a tremendous success, but it was peopled largely by Galileans who had followed him to the great city. The people of Jerusalem didn't know Jesus. They didn't know about him. They hadn't heard, well, if they'd heard anything, they'd heard very little about his healing and his teaching. And in their ignorance, and encouraged by the Pharisees, they shouted that Barabbas should be released and Jesus should die. Pilate handed Jesus over to the soldiers, who beat him with whips that had metal at the end of each whip. They put a crown of thorns on this king of the Jews. They stripped him of all his clothing. They nailed him to a cross. And Jesus died 6 hours later. Joseph of Arimathea went to Pilate after Jesus had died and asked for him to release the body to him. And Pilate was surprised that he had died so quickly. When he found out that he had, Pilate let Joseph have Jesus' body. Joseph wrapped the body in linen. He placed it in a rock tomb and then rolled a very large stone over the mouth of this cave, this tomb. The apostles had scattered far and wide. They were shocked, shell-shocked. They were grief-stricken. They were overwhelmingly disappointed. They'd given up families and they had given up homes and followed Jesus. They gave up their means of making a living for him. They had followed him everywhere, and they thought in this new kingdom, they would be far up there. They would be important people. They were not only disappointed and grief-stricken, they were terrified that they could be the next ones that would be crucified. Could things have been worse? Could they have been worse? There is a reason for everything. There is a divine plan behind everything. For Jesus, for every one of us, at all times and in all places, there is a Sunday morning. Shall we go within? Shall we know together that no matter how terrible things might look, and indeed there are terrible places, a appalling things going on in our world. Yet still, there is a plan. There is a reason to know that it will turn out in divine order. That God will hold forth His will, which is perfect, will be done, no matter how it looks right now. The apostles couldn't have been more dismayed, more grief-stricken, more frightened. And we look at places around the world, in our country and abroad, where people are terrified, grief-stricken. But let us know for them, and let us know for ourselves, and let us know especially at those times in our lives when things couldn't look blacker, that there is a Sunday morning. There is a solution. There is God's plan. There is a blessing. There is good that will come through this. For this, we give deepest thanks. Amen.
Amen.
Now, shall we briefly say the blessing of the gifts? We are blessed to be together. We are blessed in our lives in so many, many ways, and we in turn are a blessing to many other people. Today, I acknowledge God, omnipresent, as the source of all good, as the source of my good. With this acknowledgement, I accept God's will, which is abundance in every aspect of my life. I release all thoughts of lack and limitation, and I am open and receptive to the increased flow of abundance to me right now. I joyfully accept the gifts of life and give freely of the special gift that I am. Through me, God omnipresent blesses and multiplies this gift for all. Thank you, dear God. Our closing hymn is going to be In the Garden, and I assume you have copies of that? Thank you so much, Pam, for giving them out. In the Garden.
Yes. Hold on. We want you and me to one.
Thank you for standing. so much for being with us tonight.